Hey everybody, it's Holly. Today is a very special day because I am on with Chris Shelton. He is a former Scientologist, former Sea Org member, and former RPFer as well. Um, I don't really want to give your whole story, but Chris, why don't you give us a little idea of what you did outside and inside Scientology?
Yeah, sure. So I was involved with Scientology most of my life. I grew up with it. Not born but raised. And my parents got involved when I was very young, and so I grew up, learning the principles of Hubbard and thought Hubbard was a real cool guy, real smart guy, real genius, right? My father really looked up to him, and I looked up to my father, so that kind of worked out. And out of high school, I finished high school, went to public school, had a regular experience as far as that goes. Excuse me, my parents were not fanatics. They were involved and they even worked for the church for a while, but they weren't Sea Org. They didn't go like that nuts. And so they got involved that much. But then I joined staff coming out of high school, worked for them for 8 years, then joined the Sea Org, which is the ultimate commitment. That's the fanatics of Scientology. And worked in that organization for 17 more years. And so it was 25 altogether. And then I left in 2013. End of 2012 is when I actually got out. And 2013 was the year I found out what I had just spent 25 years screwing around doing, right? And there was a lot of abuse. There was a lot of nonsense during all those years, countless numbers of amounts of it, both giving and receiving. I mean, as part of the experience, you get to victimize other people too. It's an equal opportunity cult. And so I got out and started learning what had happened to me, what it was really all about, who L. Ron Hubbard was as a pathological liar, not humanitarian philosopher that I had been taught, and learned about the structure of the organization as it really operated, not as under the pretenses that they told us it had, and found out it was a tiny little cult. I mean, they talk about millions of members as though that was ever true, and it never was true. There've never been that many Scientologists, and we had very grand, very inflated ideas of ourselves, and I, unfortunately, as a result of that, had a very inflated attitude and ego to match. And so it's been a lot of years now coming out of that, educating myself about it, starting a YouTube channel, writing a book about it, and kind of trying to break down not only Scientology for people, but now I talk about destructive cults of all types and coercive control and sort of how that works. And because it's the same whether you're in a gang, you're in a cult, you're in an abusive relationship. I mean, the dynamics of the control are the same. So I've learned a lot about that, and my channel's about educating people on that. So that's my story. I'm sticking to it.
Cool. So I will link Chris's channel in the description. He's got a crap ton of content, fantastic stuff, and he helps to really show what Scientology is all about. Today we thought we would talk about auditing and what it has to do with coercive control. And the reason we bring up coercive control, Chris, why don't you tell them?
Yeah, absolutely. So, coercive control is an important term. It's mostly used around the area of domestic violence, but again, it has to do with cults and stuff too, right? It basically breaks down to three things, right? You can break it down real simple, or you can get really complicated about it. But the simplicity is isolation, manipulation, and control. If you can isolate somebody and you can start manipulating them and working on them, you can control them. And that's kind of how that works. And when it's coercive, when it's done against the person's will, when it's abusive, when it's harmful to the person and their best interests, then we call it coercive control. Because that's, you have to control children, you have to control people in certain contexts or situations where there's nothing wrong with that. You have to do that. That's just life. But then there's this coercive stuff that happens, and that's where it gets nasty, and that's what I study.
Cool. So you currently have a master's in coercive control, isn't that
I
correct?
Yeah, I do. I just finished the program. I don't have it in my hand yet, but I'm waiting for my final grades as we sit here talking on my thesis that I turned in, where I did some original research on Scientology, and it's Scientology auditing, and its use of security checking, or confessionals as they call them, and I demonstrated how that was an aspect of, or an example of, coercive control.
Nice. So, we had a few ideas for Hubbard. What is it? Yeah, Hubbard bulletins to go over. Mix
Yeah.
of, I think it's, yeah, just tech bulletins. We've got the auditing maxims, which is known as processing. We've got the auditor's code. We've got model session, and I thought we'd also go over the TRs today.
Great. Yeah, let's see if we can crunch all this in.
So I think the best place to start would be the auditor's code.
All right, fair enough. How much have you broken down or discussed? Because I'm not sure, and I'm just, for your audience's sake, how much have you broken down what an auditing session looks like, and the form of it? Does everybody familiar?
I have not broken that down much yet. I've gone over the very basics of what an e-meter is, what auditing is on the podcast that I did previously, but I don't have any videos dedicated to that yet. Currently,
Okay,
the only
cool.
ones I have are the KSW series and the student hat.
Great. Okay, cool. Well, why don't we just sort of define this real fast for everybody? Because it can be assumed, because Scientology offers what's called counseling or auditing, that it looks just like what you get when you go to a psychologist or a psychiatrist or a therapist, right? And it could not be more different. So let's break down a little bit how, and refer to these bulletins, because it's quite nefarious, actually. It's quite evil what Hubbard put together. So an auditing session always has a couple things that make it an auditing session. One is an auditor, the person who's carrying out the process, and the pre-clear, the person who's receiving the counseling. They don't call them patients, and they don't call the auditors therapists. The auditors are auditors. And Hubbard said that was from audio, from to listen. An auditor is somebody who listens, right? Even though that's the exact opposite of what they actually do. So the auditor audits, right? And he's the one who controls the e-meter. He's the one, by the way, when you sit down in an auditing room, you have a desk. And the pre-clear comes in, and he's made comfortable in a nice, big, easy chair. And the pre-clear is supposed to sit there and be comfortable and do what he's told to do. And the auditor is the one who tells him what to do. And the auditor sits in the room with the chair behind him. Because if the pre-clear, at any point during the time of the auditing, the auditor's in control of everything going on in that room. So if the pre-clear wants to get up and leave because he's uncomfortable, has to go to the bathroom, wants to get something to eat, wants to have a smoke, whatever, for whatever reason, the auditor's job is to keep him there until the auditor says he can leave. And that means physically, if need be. And auditors are trained in drills, we can go over those TRs, to specifically learn how to control somebody else's body and forcefully put it down in the chair if need be, to keep them there. And I stress this right at the beginning, because you will not find these rules operating in any psychologist's office anywhere in the world where the psychologist is engaged in ethical therapy. Right? Because psychotherapists have rules and codes that they have to follow, and they are held accountable. That's what licensing and regulation is all about. There is no such thing in Scientology. These are unlicensed therapists, basically, right? And so that rule, I want to establish that right from the get-go, because it's not obvious. It looks like a therapy session until you try to get up and leave.
And that's point number 10. Actually, we'll be getting to that on this thing.
Yeah, exactly. Because you have these points in the auditor's code, and then the training of the auditors. They are not only does this come from the culture of Scientology, these are actually very direct instructions from Hubbard on this is how an auditing session goes. And the auditing session is all about control. So that's, we got to put that there first. And as far as the meter goes, the meter's job is to be the diviner of truth. There you go. There's a Mark 6, yeah?
Mark 7,
Mark
actually.
7, there we go, yeah. So so the meter's job is it's got this little dial with a needle on it, and when the auditor asks questions or gives commands to the pre-clear, the needle moves. Now the needle's moving pretty randomly, just so we're all clear on that. And it just so happens that the auditor will often ask the same question over and over and over and over and over again until he gets a response on that needle. And the auditor can ask the same question in various ways 20 different times, watching that needle until it moves at the time when it's supposed to move. It's not just any move. It has to move at the precise end of the auditor's command. And I mention this only because I want to demystify the meter right away. There's nothing special about that thing. It is just measuring skin resistance to an electrical current that is floating over the top of a person's skin. That's what it's doing. It doesn't measure your heartbeat. It doesn't measure your internal. It's not piercing your skin as far as the electronic flow goes. But it's really just a little witchcraftery. It's a little hocus pocus. The meter's not really doing much of anything.
It's a lie detector.
Well, it can function that way under certain circumstances, but it's not like it's a reliable one any more than the polygraph is, right? Because this is actually just 1/3 of the polygraph. The polygraph measures skin resistance, heart rate, and breathing. And that's why it's called a polygraph. And the meter only measures skin resistance to the electric current. That's all it's measuring. So it's not even a very good lie detector. But Hubbard claimed that it is. And he actually wrote bulletins about how you could interrogate somebody silently. They don't even have to answer. The needle just bangs on the right ones, and you're supposed to be able to get your answer from the person. So, and they'll use the meter for all kinds of goofy things in auditing. But point is, it's just voodoo. It's nonsense, is what that meter is. But the auditor takes it very seriously and is trained to use the meter to guide the session and what he's asking the pre-clear. Now, that's an important point because the auditor is not listening to the pre-clear first. The auditor is always paying attention to the meter before the pre-clear. If the meter says one thing and the pre-clear's mouth says a different thing, the auditor will believe the meter 100% of the time.
And this can be a huge problem.
Huge problem. Gigantic problem. Because if I'm in a Scientology security check and I have asked you, have you ever raped anyone? And the meter goes doing, and I look up at you as the auditor and say, have you ever raped anyone? I am now sure as the auditor that you have. Because the meter. And you can sit over there and tell me for hours on end. Nope, absolutely not. No way did I ever do that. That's insane. That's crazy. There's no way that ever could have happened. Under no interpretation or circumstance have I ever raped anyone ever. That's crazy. And the auditor will not let you out of that room until you've confessed that you have raped someone.
Now, this brings up a quick point. So let's say the first time you ask that question, the meter responds, but say for whatever reason, the second time you ask, the meter doesn't really do anything. Just kind of FNs.
It has to read once.
Okay.
It only has to read when I, as the auditor, ask the question. And the way it goes is it's called an instant read. It has to happen at the precise end of the thought that I am voicing. So I say to you, have you ever raped anyone? It's right at the end of the word anyone that I'm watching that needle like a hawk. And that's when it has to read. So I say, have you ever raped anyone? Boing, boom, there's my read. But if I say, have you ever raped anyone? And it responds before that, or have you ever raped anyone? Way after that, that's not a valid read. Only the instant read. So that's the differentiation point. That's the point that convinces auditors and pre-clears that it's real. is Hubbard put that requirement on the reaction. The reaction has to happen instantly.
So it seems like you're kind of taking all the hits and forgetting all the misses.
Oh my God, completely. It's confirmation bias 101. The meter is nothing but a confirmation bias machine. Right? Hubbard says this is how the meter is going to react. This is what the pre-clear is going to do. And this is what you as the auditor do. And it generally works out that way. So everybody's convinced that this is how it's supposed to be. And this is the ultimate truth. And nothing could be further from the truth. It's all just smoke and mirrors. It's really one of the most amazing levels of con that I've ever seen. Now that I know all about it, compared to how it was when I was in it, it's amazing. Because there's a whole set of beliefs going on with this stuff that you have to buy into in order for this meter to be this ultimate diviner of truth, you see. You have to believe in a thetan. You have to believe that a thetan has a reactive mind. You have to believe that that reactive mind is actually made up of energy, a kind of energy that's real, that's electronic, that's detectable, but isn't something that Earth science has yet been able to figure out how to detect. But the meter does, somehow, you see. This simple Wheatstone bridge device that is child's play electronically is supposed to be the thing that pierces the veil of spirituality and shows you the electronic manifestation of a spiritual being. That's what the meter is supposed to be showing you, according to L. Ron Hubbard. So if you buy into all that, then when the needle moves, you believe it's registering some sheets of energy that are around your body that Hubbard says are with you all the time, because that's the charge that you carry around with you because of your past trauma. And that's how the meter works according to Scientologists, is it's all this faith-based nonsense about electronic sheets of energy and mental masses and reactive minds. And all of this stuff is stuff you have to take on faith, because nobody can prove any of it. And that's what this is all based on. So, but those are real fundamental principles of auditing that are true for every auditing session, no matter what kind of auditing you're doing, or how the auditor and the pre-clear are relating to each other. Those rules are always true. And as are the rules that we can go over from these bulletins. The auditor's code, I guess we could start with that. That is that's the set. There's a lot of them. There's a lot of points to the auditor's code. We don't need to go over all of them, I don't think, because it would be a really big episode. But
yeah, that would be insane.
But there's rules there that kind of give the auditor the idea that by following them, he's being an ethical practitioner. There's a con job happening in Scientology, not only on the pre-clear, but on the auditor too. Both of them are under a delusion that they're doing something helpful for each other. It's really amazing. Hubbard's the only one who really knew that it was all nonsense.
So you've kind of already gone over point 1, promise not to evaluate for the pre-clear or tell him what he should think about his case in session, with that whole example of the needle reacting. Yeah.
Well, see, that's the thing. There's one of the contradictions about Scientology is okay, all right, cool. Sorry about that. I was just had a little emergency message there. One of the things is that Hubbard will tell you one thing and then make you do the exact opposite and think that these two things make sense. For example, the meter reacts. The pre-clear says, "Nah, I didn't do that. No, that's not true. No, that doesn't make any sense to me." The auditor then says, "Well, I want you to take another look." Or somehow has to finagle this pre-clear to keep going, because the meter is what says the truth, not the pre-clear.
Now,
is that not evaluation?
Yeah, it is. It's a pretty strong evaluation. But that leads me to a question. So if you're doing Dianetic auditing for this lifetime and you get asked that question and you get the response and you're trying to go back on your time track, what if during that point whoever ends up going on their whole track during a Dianetic auditing session?
It happens all the time. I mean, you want people to go whole track. The only time that the only place that they demand that you not go whole track right away is in a sec check. It is in a confessional when you're confessing your sins.
Okay.
They demand. Hubbard actually said out loud, you don't let them jump to the whole track. You keep them in this lifetime and you get their confessions off before you let them dive down into the track.
All right, so it's not that they can't go into the whole track, it's that they can't go into it at that beginning stage. Because I was going to say the, the false purpose rundown,
yeah.
I think, has those whole track questions.
Oh, very much so. Yeah, you want to go whole track. Almost every evil intention a person carries around with them that they deal with in FPRD, false purpose rundown, is a whole track thing. Yeah.
Okay, so I think that's pretty good there. We've got another point. I promise not to process a pre-clear who is improperly fed or hungry. I can understand why that's a thing, but my question to you is, how often did this actually happen while you were on staff or in the SO?
Oh, yeah. Well, it kind of happened all the time while I was on the RPF, because, of course, when we were on the RPF, we were always tired and hungry. But you just kind of grin and bear it and kind of get it out. But generally speaking, they go way overboard the other direction with pre-clears and auditing. People get pretty fat when they're getting a lot of auditing because they're eating all the time and getting a lot of rest. You got to have 8 hours and stuff. It's not an hour count so much as the meter is utilized to determine, again, whether you have had enough sleep and food. You can show up and say, I just ate, I'm stuffed, I'm full, I've had 8 hours of sleep, everything's great. But if there's a test that gets done using the E-meter, it's called the metabolism test. And basically, once you've gotten on the meter and you've gotten the sensitivity set, you have the person take a deep breath, hold it for just a moment, and let it out through their mouth. And then the meter is supposed to register a fall. Nice big fall. Boom. Supposed to go right over. And if it doesn't, you didn't pass your basal metabolism test, right? It has to go at least a third of a dial, drop over. It has to be a nice big fall. So if it only goes a little bit over, or it doesn't go over at all, or if it rises, goes the opposite direction, got to go get some food, vitamins, bee pollen, liquids, whatever. You got to do something. Or we're going to have to sit here and police how you're taking a deep breath. I got to get you to sit up straight and get comfortable and get all in the chair so we get a nice big registration of your body so that we get that metabolism check, right? So that is a purely physical check that's done with the E-meter. That doesn't have anything to do with how your thetan's doing. That's just your body. But that's how they verify that point of the auditor's code is they'll do that check.
Now, this is a random point that you kind of brought me into. What was with this fascination with bee pollen?
Oh, yeah, I don't really know, except for the fact that, man, did it make that needle move. I mean, you could take a couple bee pollen, not everybody. And I really don't even know. I've never even gone back and looked. I just pulled that out of my memory when we were sitting here talking about getting a tab check. But there's some quality to, I don't know if it's oxidation or what bee pollen does to you on an immediate basis that gets gets your system going. But it had a definite effect on metabolism checks for certain people. Some people, no. You could take all the bee pollen you want, it didn't move. But other people, it would have a dramatic effect.
All right. Thank you for that information. All right. So part 10, point 10, promise not to let the pre-clear end session on his own determinism, but to finish off the cycles I've begun. Cycles, for those of you who don't know, I don't even think I've covered this. Cycle is a cycle of action. And I'm pretty sure it includes start, change, stop, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, the basic cycle of action is start, change, stop. That's your fundamental of that. Create, survive, destroy. would be another aspect of a cycle of action or a cycle of life, right?
Okay, so we'll be going more into point 10, not letting the pre-clear end session on its own determinism when we get into the TRs, because that is specifically made. One of the exercises is specifically made for that.
That's right. But that does reinforce my point that it's baked right into the auditor's code that the guy can't just stop if he wants to. This is really important point because we're talking about therapy here. We're talking about a place in a context where people are extremely vulnerable. They are opening themselves up in ways that they just don't do in real life, in the day-to-day of life and family life and work life and everything else. People aren't generally opening themselves up the way they do in a therapy session or a counseling session or an auditing session. So when you are abused in these environments or contexts, it actually matters. It can have more of a detrimental effect than if you're just in your day-to-day life, you know?
Yep. All right. Cool.
Yeah.
So then we've got point. All right. Sorry about that. 13 and 14. I promise to run every major case action, which is just an auditing process or a group of processes, to a floating needle. So this again brings up the point, it doesn't matter what the PC says or does, the e-meter is the most important thing. And if someone has a floating needle, then they're supposed to end that process right then and there, whether the PC wants to go on or not.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so then we've got that, as well as I promise never to run any one action beyond its floating needle. But in this case, what happens if the pre-clear wants to say something else, wants to confess something else, if he's in a sec check or whatnot?
Well, if the meter doesn't respond, then it's not charged, and that means that we're not taking it up. You do not ever run uncharged items or questions in a Scientology session. This is one way that you control the pre-clear so they don't control the session. One of the things Hubbard ran into early on was people on the pre-clear side running the session. I want to talk about my mom. Out, 3 hours later, the auditor's sitting there going, Jesus Christ, right? And this guy's just going on and on and on about his mom. Or goes from mom to wife to daughter to grandmother to whatever, because the guy's just got, this is what he's going to do and this is what he wants to talk about. Hubbard said, nope. That is not how this is going to go. We're flipping the script on that. And it's the auditor who determines what is going to get talked about. And it's the meter that is used to verify or confirm that by finding that charge, that reaction on the needle. If it's not reacting, we do not ever take it up. I don't care what it is or what you're trying to tell me. I don't want to hear about it.
Now that shows a complete contradiction to normal psychology and psychiatry.
Correct. Another place that you can cut a pre-clear off at the knees is something that is truly important to them might not be responding on the meter in any way. However, to be fair, generally speaking, what a pre-clear is talking about will respond in some fashion. And let's not forget, it's mostly random responses on that meter that are being taken up in the first place. So it's like I'm sitting here talking about this from the Scientology point of view, but ultimately speaking, therapy is for the person sitting in the chair. And so to just deflect or ignore or put the importance on the e-meter to verify what they're saying, it's just not right. It's just not a good approach.
All right, so I promise not to grant beingness to the pre-clear in session. Again, another NES term that Hubbard likes to use.
You notice
Could you describe in quickly what beingness actually means? Could you clear that word for us?
Yeah, sure. Beingness. So a thetan can't help but be. There is no non-existence for a thetan, right? A spiritual entity has to exist. The quality of how he exists and the state of his existence is what what the word beingness refers to, right? Who is he as terms of identity, associations, presentation, manners, how the person talks, walks, how you perceive them, how you see them. That is their beingness. And a person, of course, can have or adopt lots of different beingnesses for different situations. You can look at it broadly, or you can narrow the target and talk about, for example, the beingness of a pastor in a church would be quite a different beingness from your angry mom, right?
By the way, that was my fiance. She just wanted to say hi.
Cool. Hey. So beingness is basically, if you had, attitude might be a synonym, but it's supposed to encompass identity as well.
Okay, so that would be valences, correct?
Valence is close. Valence is a personality package that exists in a person's mind. A valence is a set of characteristics. Technically speaking, like very, very exactly, a valence is something that exists in your mind of somebody else's personality. So what you imagine your father's personality to be, all the characteristics, identity marks, ways of talking and speaking, language, mannerisms, all of that, as you understand it, is your father's valence. And you could adopt your father's valence, go into your father's valence, start acting like your father. But of course, you're only going to be as accurate as you've perceived your father, right? And you're not really being your father. You're being your idea of your father. That's what a valence is.
Okay, so if for whatever reason I were to walk into a Scientology org, I'm assuming they would not consider me out of valence for being trans. Is there another term for that other than being 1-1 on the tone scale?
No, there is a lot of terms for it, and out of valence is absolutely one of them.
Okay.
Yeah, because this whole trans thing, according to Scientology, is you being out of valence. You're being something that you're really not, according to their way of looking at the world.
Now that seems kind of like they're trying to read between the lines of Hubbard's policies and bulletins, because there weren't really trans people back in the 60s, or at least they weren't out nearly as much as they should be. So how do they pull out this interpretation for this specific circumstance?
From the materials from Science of Survival, which I'm sure you're familiar with, because that's where he kind of goes into it in some detail in terms of assigning it at a tone level, emotional band, right? The 1-1, the covertly hostile. He says everybody in any kind of perverted state of beingness is in this 1-1 band, right? And therefore out of valence, because there is no thetan who is naturally 1-1. So if you're stuck there chronically dramatizing your out of valenceness, your covert hostility, your 1-1ness, then obviously you're out of valence, right? Okay. I mean, an argument could be made that just because you have a body, you're out of valence as a thetan, but they don't really go there with that. It's more, what's stressed with that term is more about personality packages. That's what that's about.
All right. I promise not to mix the processes of Scientology with other practices, except when the pre-clear is physically ill and only medical means will serve. This brought up a question on my end. Isn't Dianetics and Scientology supposed to cure 70% of man's ills?
Yeah.
So why does this point even exist? Why don't they just think that Scientology will cure it all?
Well, because there's still that 20%, right? You could still have a broken bone. Hubbard accedes to that in every lecture he brings it up. He always says, look, doctors are around to set bones. You fall out of a tree or something like that. You get hit by a car because you weren't paying attention. Or he even talks about how you could go exterior and be kind of disoriented and not used to running your body from an exterior state and get into an accident. And you could chalk that up to being what he called temporarily PTS. Okay. Right? You're just like, whoa, with your body and everything. You're just kind of out of control, right? So he always had some excuse for this stuff. But the qualifying point there is really, if you think about it, a little bit more of a legal point. right? Because
Yep.
they always have an out of, well, yeah, you got to go get medicine if you.
Can't make medical claims.
Exactly. Yeah,
Okay.
they had to start towing that line early on.
All right. I promise to maintain communication with the PC and not to cut his comm or permit him to overrun in session. And from what I've gathered, overrunning is going past an FN.
Yeah, going
Okay.
past the end point of the process.
Okay. All right. Cool.
Yeah, you're not supposed to overrun or underrun. You got to do it just right.
All right. I promise to continue to give the pre-clear the processor auditing command when needed in the session. So again, only when the e-meter says it's needed, not when this is before they've reached the EP, the end phenomena of the process.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep. Got to keep going.
I promise not to let a pre-clear run a wrongly understood command. So let's say you're in a Dianetic auditing session. What if you have an MU?
Yeah, you clear it up.
All right. I wasn't sure if they would end the session or whatnot, have you go clear it up and bring it back.
Oh, hell no. No. You just wrap it up. You just clear it up right there.
Got it. Promise never to use the secrets of a pre-clear divulged in session for punishment or personal gain. That just sounds like straight up bullshit.
Well, it is.
Dead agenting, hate sites, and blackmail.
Well, exactly. Organizationally, they're not following the auditor's code, right? The odds are that the auditors who actually pull those confessions from people that get used as blackmail later on aren't the ones who go put those websites together. So the auditor, technically speaking, is still following the auditor's code. He's not the one doing the divulging.
OSA doesn't have to follow the auditor's code.
But OSA doesn't give a shit about the auditor's code, right? OSA's not auditing you. The ethics officer isn't auditing you. The executives of the organization are not auditing you. They don't have to follow any of these codes. And the information that you give to an auditor is written down. Sometimes recorded audio, sometimes recorded video. And all of that is stored in a folder forever with your name on it.
That you never get to see.
And that folder, not only do you not ever get to see it, it's not your property. You don't have any claim to it. And in fact, in order to get auditing in Scientology, you have to sign a legal contract that makes it abundantly clear that you understand that those are not your property and never will be. They are the church's property, and the church can do whatever it wants to with those folders. So basically, I explained all that because it completely nullifies this point of the auditor's code, even if every auditor you ever have follows this code rigorously. All of the nonsense can still happen to you without breaking any of these rules.
Okay, that makes sense. I wrote down this question during my analysis before I actually knew what an FES was.
Oh, yeah.
Folder error summary, for those who don't know, is when I believe the case supervisor or CS looks at the auditing folders of other pre-clears and looks for times the auditors may have messed up because maybe you're not getting, maybe the PC's not feeling good or something like that. Some process went wrong or whatnot.
Yeah, if only.
Wait, why is that?
Basically, you've given a decent description of it, except it's used to make money in ways that circumvent a lot of what you just said. It's another way to make money off of pre-clears by using up their auditing hours doing paperwork. It's basically a paperwork activity.
I just watched your podcast with Sonny Pereira regarding case supervising, so that's where I actually heard about it, and I know that that the case supervisor FESing is charged at halftime, I believe. So an hour of FESing is 30 minutes off of the pre-clears intensive.
Correct. However, very rarely is a case supervisor the one actually doing it. It's usually dished out to some auditor who doesn't have a pre-clear right now, and the auditor does the FESing. So you will see auditors who don't have PCs assigned to them if they just don't have there's not enough pre-clears around. They will start doing this FESing, and they used to call this FESing to glory. And they would try to, between Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday morning, because the week ends on Thursday at 2, you would find auditors in the HGC madly spending hours and hours going through folders that had hours in them on account and charging the pre-clears money for this, not even asking them, just doing it because they need to keep the FESing up, and
They need
so
to get
they
those
will.
stats up.
That's right, because it's all stat driven. If the stats didn't exist, none of this would be happening. So it's to keep the stats up and keep the money flowing, right? The spice must flow, and this is in the HTCs and in the places where auditing is delivered. This is where the real money of Scientology is made, and FESing is one of the ways that they get you, because they use up your hours and you're not even in the chair getting any therapy. It's just paperwork. And they'll find stuff they have to fix because it's an error summary. It's going through and finding all the places the auditor screwed up. So it's finding all those places and then doing a repair session on you, which they're going to charge you for, to fix their errors.
Now, what if a auditor or somebody is FESing and they can't find any mistakes?
Then they don't find any mistakes. They still charge for the time that they spent.
But if the PC is still doing badly, is still not getting case gain?
Well, then they're going to find mistakes, or they're going to interview the guy and find out what the hell's going on, that they can't find it. What's going on? What did the auditor do? What did the director of processing do? There's lots of ways of getting information out of a pre-clear, finding out what's going on. But let's keep in mind that somebody doing worse and worse and worse in this system would kind of be the expected result of this kind of abusive therapeutic environment. You know what I mean? So, it's sometimes, and as somebody who administered auditing and auditors for years, I oversaw all of this, you would have that happen, and you would be sitting there scratching your head, trying to figure out what's going on with this person, until they finally either run out of money and just can't pay you anymore, and so you blow them off, or they just can't stand it anymore, and they just stop showing up, and they stop returning your phone calls, and when they leave, they take off, and they don't want to do Scientology anymore. And that happens a lot in Scientology organizations.
Now, I was actually going to ask if PCs have ever left because of the fact that FESing takes hours away from the PC.
People have gotten really, really pissed. I never saw that be the final straw. That kind of thing, this is where the controls come into play, right? Because there's a lot of controls in Scientology. It's, we're only talking about what goes on in an auditing session. There's a whole world outside of that. And for example, if a pre-clear were to find out 4 hours are suddenly gone on his auditing hours because of FES, and he goes, what the hell? I didn't authorize that. Well, who said that was okay? He will be sat down first with the director of processing, who will go over the bulletins, show him what FESing is and why it's necessary and why it's mandatory to keep it up. And they'll say, look, this is Hubbard's directions. We're not, we're just following what Hubbard said to do. This is how auditing gets delivered. If you don't like it, well, that's too bad. This is how it gets done. And if the guy's still bitching and moaning after that, he'll be sent down to ethics. And the ethics officer is going to start investigating. Why are you so critical of this organization that's just trying to help you? What is your problem? Why are you being such a problem about this? What are you up to? Have you been looking online? Have you been checking out Scientology on the internet?
Now
Have
you're
you
PTS.
been talking to people? Right? In other words, they'll just start investigating this person because they're complaining. Looking for what they're looking for on the internet could be one of many avenues of, how the ethics officer might try to find out what is this guy up to that he's not telling us because he's being critical of the organization. See, and if you're critical of Scientology or its organizations, that means you have sinned. You've done bad things.
All right, cool. I promise not to advocate Dianetics or Scientology only to cure illness or only to treat the insane. Obviously, again, FDA ruling, can't make medical claims, knowing well they were intended for spiritual gain. But this brings up a problem for me. Isn't the introspection rundown supposed to cure the insane? And is the introspection rundown even done anymore?
I don't know. Yeah, yes, I would say it is because I've seen it practiced, even outside orgs. I think there was a Narcanon that was doing a similar thing to that. And what was the question? Does it cure insanity? No, it does not. It's supposed to be the handling to de-stimulate somebody who's had a psychotic break.
Okay.
A
This isn't for the
psychotic
chronically
break.
insane.
Yeah, no, it's not. No, Scientology does not, by policy, Scientology does not deal with the chronically insane or the permanently insane. The introspection rundown was the action Hubbard put together to deal with somebody who was having a psychotic episode. And the idea was to calm them down, get them away from other people, not have anybody talk to them, which becomes its own level of problem very quickly, by the way, and becomes its own level of abuse for this person because they're literally locked in a room where notes are the only way they can communicate with people. And they can sit there and bang on the door for 6 hours and not be let out of that room. I mean, it's its own level of abuse. But the idea is to de-stimulate the person and calm them down so that they stop acting psychotic. It doesn't work. And sometimes tragically so. I mean, Lisa McPherson is a story of that, and that was a tragedy from beginning to end.
Just realized my mic was off. For anybody who's wondering, Scientology processes, some people say they've had gains from them, some people say they've had wins, but the way that they functioned theoretically don't really work.
No.
Okay.
No.
I promise not to permit sexual liberties or violations of patients. Now, what are sexual liberties in this case? Is this an auditor having sex with a pre-clear?
Yeah, there's no sex. There's no sexual anything going on with pre-clears and auditors. I mean, there's no kissing, hugging, fondling, any of that stuff. That's pretty hardcore rule. There is not, though, any stricture on when or how long an auditor has to wait after he's finished auditing a pre-clear, or she, before they can start dating or picking up on their pre-clears. In psychology, it's a 2-year rule. You just can't, right? If you break that rule, you better be prepared to face some consequences because regulatory boards watch for that kind of thing, licensing boards and stuff. But in Scientology, there's no such thing, and people would often brag about asking their pre-clears and stuff out the day they are finished auditing them, so you can get some nudge, nudge, wink, wink, know what I mean kind of things going on, but the auditor's code is supposed to prevent that.
All right. Thank you. Wait a minute. Never mind. That's another introspection rundown thing. And you've already cleared that up very well.
Cool.
All right. So we're done with the auditor's code. Now, what do we want to do? Auditing maxims?
Yeah. Well, again, just to put this in context, these maxims are old, 1950 old. I mean, these are original pieces of, these were the mantras that Dianetics was done under. And Dianetics was a hardcore kind of roll your own psychotherapy. And you can imagine the nonsense people get up to when you have untrained, unlicensed therapy going on. I mean, and this is 1950, when lithium was the order of the day and psychiatrists still wore lab coats and were basically mostly doing lobotomies on people. So this was a very different time than it is now, culturally, as well as in these fields of mental health. So these mantras come out, these maxims, and it's a real tough it out kind of approach. We have since learned how damaging that is for people. But back then, this is evolved through tough love, that we used to hear about in the 70s and 80s, and this stuff, I have to abuse you to help you, and this kind of approach. And it's very, very questionable stuff. And when it gets to therapeutic levels, it's almost guaranteed to be harmful to somebody. So there's 3 of them, right?
Yep. So we have what turns it on will turn it off.
Yep.
Which means if you're going through a process and you happen to start feeling negative emotions or any kind of somatics, which, as I've mentioned before in my previous videos, is a feeling of something. So if you're going through an incident and you feel a stomach ache or whatever, that's a somatic. So what turns on that somatic will turn it off, meaning the process caused it to happen. The process will stop it from happening.
Correct.
All right.
Correct.
And then we got the way out is the way through. So this kind of brings in the idea of there is no ending a session early. You need to finish this process, otherwise it's not going to get resolved.
Correct.
So again, this brings, no matter what the PC says, PC does, whatever, you have to finish the session properly.
Yep.
And then get the PC through it.
Get the PC through it. Exactly. And the idea with this was that Dianetics works 100% of the time. And it will always work on the person you're working on if you do it right. And if you stick it out, if you stick to it, if you keep going through it.
He was such a liar.
Oh my God, of course he was. And the idea here was that if you took the coward's route, and let the person blow the session, leave the session, stop doing the session because you were clearly, visibly hurting or distressing this person or traumatizing them, that was on you. You were rabbiting. You were a rabbit. You were running scared like a little rabbit out of that session, Mr.
About to
Auditor.
say, I've never heard of that term before.
Yep, you were rabbiting. Yep, that was the term, and it was a coward's way out, right? And this goes in alignment with Hubbard's other comments on the subject of sympathy and empathy, because sympathy was the last thing Hubbard wanted you doing. He said if there was nothing else you could do for somebody, you could sympathize with them, I guess, right?
But it was a last resort.
Exactly. Totally last resort, because here we have these tools with Dianetics, and you can actually handle this person's aberrations and get them through it. But you have to get them through it. No rabbiting. Now, the real reason for this is because you are trying to create a euphoric state in the pre-clear. You're trying to get this guy to a state of euphoria. And in order to induce that euphoria, you have to, the formula in Scientology auditing is that you turn it on and then it gets turned off through repetition. You go over and over and over the thing, right? What turns it on will turn it off. The process is designed to turn it on. It's designed to create ill traumatizing effects because you are forcefully recalling and regressing to earlier times of actual trauma you have experienced, and you're throwing yourself right back into it again and reliving it and recounting it as you go. This is the Dianetic process, but it's trance induction. You're putting somebody back into this past incident and making them relive it. And there's a very small percentage of people that this works on. This is studied material. There is research on this. I'm not making this stuff up. This isn't just my opinion. So you get this person into this mental state where they are traumatized, where they're deep down in this stuff. Right? And you're going over and over and over it, and they're socking them into it and putting them in this trance state. But before that, before you've done that to them, you have first educated them using Dianetics or using the education materials as to what's happening to them and what to expect.
But
what's supposed to happen.
That brings up an issue because now the PC knows what he has to do to end the session, and that was actually a thing I was going to mention. What is an example of how someone may be able to fake their way out of a session?
Well, there's different ways, but where I wanted to, and we can go to that, but first I want to finish this thought because faking it to get out of the session is one avenue out of there, if you're kind of aware of what's going on. But what I'm trying to point out is you are so socked into traumatic episodes of your past, engrams, moments that by definition contain pain and unconsciousness, right? So you are being socked into the worst times of your life. and you're being made to go over and over and over those incidents, which is trance induction, and you've been pre-set up to believe you're supposed to have this euphoric experience at the end of this ride. And so, surprise, that's what happens. Right? I mean, this is what suggestion is all about. When we talk about pre and post hypnotic suggestion, that's the reinforcement factor here. And I'm not talking about hypnotism as some like, I don't know, Krishnamurti, Rasputin, and we're going to get everybody. This doesn't work on everybody, okay? In fact, this doesn't work on most people, which is why most people aren't doing Dianetics, because it just doesn't work on them. But for those that it does work on, you sock somebody down into this kind of trance state with this suggestive material, and you induce euphoric states in them. And this is why they had to keep pushing through the trauma. What turns it on will turn it off. The way out's the way through. Those mantras actually create this scenario I'm talking about here, where you insist that you have to keep going. No therapist anywhere in the world who operates ethically would ever demand that anyone on their therapy couch keep going through something when they don't want to keep going. It's the person's decision as to what happens in the therapy session, not in a Dianetic session, and not from day one. The entire model has been to take control away from the pre-clear and make the auditor run the pre-clear through his engrams. And that puts the auditor in this very power position. And that's how an auditor gets away with abusing the pre-clear so much, is the pre-clear's indoctrinated, and the auditor is indoctrinated into actually thinking that this abuse is necessary in order for there to be this euphoric state that is then achieved, where the person's like, oh my God, I feel so good now.
You got your VGIs there, it seems.
That's right. Right? Oh, wow, that's why my mom. Oh, my God, that's why my dad did that. Oh, that's why I always cock like my mom, blah, blah, blah. It seems so amazing. And trust me, I have been there 1,000 times. It is kind of an amazing feeling. It's very comparable to being quite high. The chemical processes are very similar. Euphoria is euphoria, right? And this can create adoration for Hubbard. An awe-inspiring event is very often directed right toward Hubbard. He's source and cause and all of that. So Hubbard gets aggrandized in this whole process, and you are sent from that session right to the salesperson, who will then tell you everything about what to think about what just happened to you. The auditor is not supposed to evaluate for you. So after the session, the auditor is not going to talk to you. You get sent over to the salesperson, and the salesperson is not your auditor. And the salesperson is happy to interpret everything that just happened to you in a very pro-Scientology positive light. And look what you just got through. Look at all that charge you just blew. Look at all those engrams that are gone now. You're so much better off, aren't you? Of course you are, right? Lots of post-hypnotic suggestions going on here. So it's not just the auditing session, it's what the auditing session does to the person that then gets them over to the salesperson to extract more money for more auditing, and that's how it rolls out.
And you were mentioning about the feeling high part, and that reminds me of when you mentioned addiction and people getting addicted to auditing sessions.
That's right. That's exactly right. And people do. I watched it happen. I watched a woman who came in daily because her smile faded a little bit. She was walking around like, and then she comes in like 2 days later and she's like, I just don't feel quite as good. Can I have another session? I mean, it was just like, whoa, that tripped me out. That was the first time I saw it. I was like, damn. It wasn't the only time I saw that, though. And then, of course, to get to your question about people who fake it to get out, these are people who either first session and they realize this is bullshit and they just got to get the hell out of there, and they realize quickly they have to tell this person what they want to hear, so they'll let them out of the room. That happens, and then you never see the person again. Or you have somebody who has had a series of euphoric experiences, who has had this work on them, but then it stops, or they have a bad session, or they're distracted, or some problem, or some issue, or whatever. It's not hitting them the same way it used to, and yet they have to get out of the session, and they know what's expected of them, and so they fake it till they make it. And it always starts in that kind of spirit. That's sort of, well, there must be something wrong with me here. I'll just say the words I need to say, or somehow think the happy thoughts and get out of here. But I know auditing works, and I know it's really just me. See, you can have that kind of phenomena happen because of the cognitive dissonance of it. It rocks the person a bit. But if it happens too many times, they won't come back, and they'll escape.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think that's a pretty good coverage of the auditing maxims. So let's say you want to hop in a model session.
Quickly, let's go ahead and do that, and then maybe we could start because I've only allocated so much time for us today.
All right.
Is that cool?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Great. Okay, so let's talk about model session real fast because that's easy.
So the first thing is setting up the session, making sure the room and the session have no interruptions or distractions.
Running
a checklist.
Let me pull back for a second on this because it's weird. It's a weird thing. It's a weird expression. Model session. What is that? As part of the briefing course, as part of the sort of bringing together everything in the 60s and sort of uniting and putting together what is modern Scientology, Hubbard decided that sessions needed to have a model format, a sequence of things that would always happen in every session, no matter what was going on. No matter what auditing you were doing, because there's thousands of different processes and lots of different styles of auditing. And yet all of them have this model session format now that is followed. And it's basically the outline or framework of the session. And so I just wanted to contextualize it real fast.
All right, that's perfect. All right, this is one thing that I kind of remembered that kind of threw me off a bit. PC seated in chair furthest from the door. That sounds like a thing that's used in police interrogations in order to create that distance between the suspect and leaving the interrogation, even though they're free to do it at any time.
You don't say. Really? They do that in police interrogations too? I didn't know about that. Yes, that is exactly what they do. And again, proof positive of what I'm sitting here talking about from the beginning, right? It's right there in model session. Every session is supposed to be set up that way.
That's just absolutely insane to me. But we've got the reasons not to begin the session. So you got your lack of sleep, your alcohol, your drugs, or your lack of food.
Yep.
Then we got the start of session. So whether it's Dianetics or something, the auditor will go into this whole spiel about the start of the session through some script or whatever.
That's right.
Then we've got rudiments. Could you give us a little bit of a rundown on rudiments?
Yeah, real quick, because it's a little weird. Rudiments basically are three. There's 3 or 6, but there's 3 basic ones. There are questions you check with the pre-clear before you start the major section of the auditing session, and the rudiments are called rudiments or rudes because they're supposed to be rudimentary, fundamental, basic to the auditing session happening at all. And the simplicity of it is, if you are distracted or your mind is out of session off on some other problem you have, or some upset or argument you had with your wife before you came, or there's some thing you did and you have your attention on it, right? Maybe you committed a little moral transgression or something's getting on your conscience a little bit. Those are things that will distract you. You'll sit there thinking about them and you won't be engaged in the auditing process. And so the rudiments are done to check for those things. It doesn't assume that they exist. It just checks for them. Do you have an ARC break? do you have a present time problem? Has a withhold been missed? Those are the 3 rudiment questions that are checked. And you check those things, and if the meter responds, you look for something. Hopefully the needle will just float and you can get on with the session. The idea is that before you begin the major process of the session, your needle is already floating. So you're at a good place before we even get started. And that's what the rudiments are designed to do.
All right. Next, we have the major action of the session. That's the process, the main process.
Yep.
R factor.
Reality factor. What is about to happen? You get an R factor in Scientology. That's a statement about what's about to happen. Like if I were to, I could take you into a session, and the CS, the case supervisor, might write an R factor for me to tell to you, right? And that reality factor, that R factor is, hey, we're going to now be getting, you were doing your grade 2, and we've been going great on it, but the case supervisor has taken note of a couple things and wants me to do this correction list on you before we continue on with grade 2. So that's what we're going to do. And that might be an example of an R factor.
Thank you. All right. Clearing commands.
Yeah, that's where you make sure that you, okay. That is where you make sure that the words of the commands are understood and all is well with the words and understanding of the process.
Got it. So that's where you're covering all your MUs.
Exactly.
Okay, so then you run the process to the end phenomena, whether that's floating needle, cognitions, VGIs, whatever. I've already discussed that on my channel. Havingness. When indicated or included in CS instructions, it says auditor runs 10 to 12 commands of PC's havingness process.
Yes, that is because you've put a person into a traumatic episode and then brought them to a euphoric state, they're sometimes a little disoriented. So the havingness process is basically look around the room and find something you could touch or have, or, it's just basically kind of reorienting you to present time. It's meant to be, a couple commands, no big deal. It's not something you check on the meter or do a whole big thing with.
Kind of reminds me of locationals a little bit.
That's exactly what they're like.
Okay. And then the end of session. So you tell the pre-clear that you're ending the session. Ask, is there anything you would care to say or ask before I end the session? Now, here's where I have a problem. If you're not allowed to go past your FN, if you're not allowed to overrun, why is this there?
Well, this is after the process is all done, the havingness is all done, everything's wrapped up.
Okay.
So now you're literally about to walk out the door, right? You're just wrapping up, and it's like, is there anything you care to say or ask before I end the session? Yeah, this was a great session. Oh, tell the CS I really love him. Stuff like that is usually what comes up at that point.
Got it. So then acknowledge all that, write it down. PC asks any questions, answer whatever, take to case supervisor if you have to. Auditor ends with the words end of session in tone 40. Hubbard seemed to make a really big deal out of this specific phrase, and he also made a big deal about not saying that's it.
Yeah, no, it's end of session.
So, and then once that's done, you take the PC to the examiner.
That's right.
All right, we've covered model session, so let's get into the TRs.
Well, let's go ahead and do that another episode.
All right, perfect. I was
Yeah.
wondering when you needed to end off here.
Sorry. I would love to go longer, but life demands otherwise. So.
All right, that's perfectly great. Thank you so much for being on this with me. This has provided so much information that it's much different coming from a former Scientologist than it is just reading Hubbard's works and trying to interpret it your own way.
Of course it is. Of course it is, because there's a lot more to Scientology than just what's in the written and spoken works. There's the culture of it. So. Yeah, exactly. All right. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you. It was great having you on.
Bye-bye.
And we'll talk about part 2 later. So.
Excellent.
All right. Later.